Mr. Miller?
Yeah.
There's not Rob Miller, all the way from Pennsylvania. There you go. Welcome.
Yeah, I wouldn't miss this for a long. I wouldn't miss it for anything.
All right. Me neither. Yeah, exactly. My moment to embarrass myself in public now on Facebook Live and everything else. Okay, we are about ready to start. So we're going to start. First and foremost, I want to welcome you all formally here, whoever's on. And, had there not been a little hiccup in the world, I'd be broadcasting now from Rostov, Russia, where I was anticipating to be tonight with a few of our congregants. The second day of Nisan, which is tonight, or will be shortly in Los Angeles, is the 100th yard site. Remember, it's 100th year of the passing of the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, who's buried in Rostov, Russia. That's where Rabbi Danziger is a shliach. And initially, we were meant to be there with a few other of us praying at the Ohel, at the resting place of the Rebbe Rashab. So no doubt, though, because of the holiness of the day, the prayers are certainly being sent and certainly there, and Hashem should grant everyone who needs a speedy recovery and to ensure the health and prosperity for everyone else.
Amen.
With that, we're moving along here to the beginning of the lesson. It is titled, Peering Through Pain, Addressing Pain, Anguish, and Anxiety. And the reality is that, unfortunately, we're living in a time, I guess, an unprecedented time in our world, certainly in my lifetime, and I could probably say that's true for most of us here, if not everybody, where it's not just a single individual or a small group of people who are suffering, which is bad in and of itself, but it's the world literally that's in turmoil on levels that I historically cannot remember ever happening, even having studied parts of history myself. So with that in mind, we're going to try to give some insight to ourselves. First and foremost, how do we deal with what's going on, the anxiety, the pain, etc., and ultimately, how do we help others? So with that, we're going to discuss negative emotions, for starters, that result from suffering, hardship, from pain, from tragedy. And this kind of, for those who took the course, is the last in the lessons regarding negative emotions, etc. I have no doubt there's some people in this room or on this chat or watching on Facebook, what have you, who are suffering, who know us, have a loved one who is suffering or suffered in the past. I mean, asking the question, is there anybody there, would be a foolish question. And reality is, we're all waiting for Mashiach to come to usher in that blissful time of tranquility, which will be devoid of hardship, devoid of pain, of suffering, of illness, etc. And we all know too well, maybe speedily in our days, that suffering in reality is a part of life. Unfortunately, it's a part of life. In some people's lives, it's a larger part. In some people's lives, it's a lesser part. But nonetheless, it's there. So whenever a person comes across hardship or pain, it usually spawns a whole host of negative emotions. And they may include sadness, helplessness, anxiety, fear, worry, frustration, anger, jealousy of others who we perceive to have an easier life. It's like, why is this happening to me and not to them? I'm a good person. Why is God doing this to me? I can think of plenty of other wicked people who deserve it more than I, etc. And what ends up happening is that often these thoughts sort of cripple us emotionally, cripple us spiritually, and on a practical level, cripple us in a very pragmatic way, day in, day out. So the question that's going to drive today's lesson is, how do I maintain happiness and avoid negative emotions when I have issues with livelihood, with health, with family, with areas that I worry about? What's the future going to bring? Tanya, in particular, which is authored by the Alter Rebbe, it is known as the Bible of Chabad Chasidus, addresses these questions and has a very interesting approach to it. And we're going to, as we go through the course, get to a number of different passages that were authored by the Alter Rebbe to help us along with that. But before we get to that, we're going to go to text number 1, which is, let's see if I know how to do this now. No. Okay, text number 1, next page. Is there she? Where'd you go? How do I figure it? How do I get, here's next page. Hold on a second. Bear with me here. We're going to get to sooner or later. There we go. See, I know exactly what I'm doing here. So the question we have for discussion, how can living a divine soul-aligned life alleviate the emotional fallout from hardship? Typically speaking, when I've taught these JLI classes in the past, I've given people who are sitting in the opportunity to read the text, but I'm not sure who's on, who's not, so you forgive me, I'll just read it myself. Text number 1 states as follows. A man once came to Rabbi Dov Ber, the famed Maggid of Mizrich. He was the successor of the Baal Shem Tov, with a question. The Talmud tells us, ask the man, that a person is supposed to bless God for the bad, just as he blesses him for the good.
Amen.
So how is this humanly possible? How can a human being possibly react to what he experiences as bad in exactly the same way he responds to what he experiences as good? How can a person be as grateful for his troubles as he is for his joys? So Rabbi Dov Ber, the Maggid of Mizrich, replied, to find an answer to your question, you must go see my disciple, Reb Zusha van Napoli. Only he can help you in this matter. Reb Zusha received his guest warmly and invited him to make himself at home. The visitor decided to observe Reb Zusha's conduct for posing his question. Before long, he concluded that his host truly exemplified the Talmudic dictum which so puzzled him. He couldn't think of anyone who suffered more hardship in his life than did Reb Zusha. A frightful pauper, there was never enough to eat in Reb Zusha's home, and his family was beset with all sorts of afflictions and illnesses. Yet Reb Zusha was always good-humored and cheerful, and constantly expressed his gratitude to the Almighty for all his kindness. But what is his secret? How does he do it? The visitor finally decided to pose his question. So one day he said to his host, I wish to ask you something. In fact, this is the purpose of my visit to you. Our Rebbe advised me that you can provide me with the answer. What is your question? Asked Reb Zusha. The visitor repeated that he had asked of the Maggid, what he had asked rather of the Maggid, and he said, you raise a good point, said Reb Zusha, after thinking the matter through. So let's see if I can get onto the PowerPoint here and do this. No, that's not the right way to do it. There we go. First and foremost, I want to thank the sponsor, by the way, for this evening's class, which is Esther Kornfeld. So much obliged for your sponsorship. On to the PowerPoint, how to maintain happiness in hardship.
You're welcome.
Thank you. One of them is to bless God. One of them is to, we're getting there. Oh, the first one is to bless God. The rest of them you're going to find out shortly. Now that I got that PowerPoint up there. So let's see if I can get back to the class. There we go. Okay. So Reb Zusha proceeded to respond to the question. But before I tell you what he answered, I'm going to ask you, what would you respond? You know, respond simultaneously because that would create havoc. But you can give a silent response as to how you would answer that question. And now that you've decided what that answer is, I'll tell you what Reb Zusha responded. He said the following, you raised a good point. And he said after thinking the matter through, but he says, why did our Rebbe send you to me?
Are here.
So we got your son saying hi to Zadie.
Oh, whoops.
So he said, why did our Rebbe send you to me? How would I know? He should have sent you to someone who's experiencing suffering, which is really an odd answer. Here's a man who is destitute as they come, an absolute pauper, living in abject poverty, and yet still all can figure out why the Rebbe sent this man to him to ask him, you know, his opinion on this matter. We have a question for discussion, which is on page 142. In your estimation, was it possible for Reb Zusha to genuinely feel that he had never experienced suffering? The man obviously was suffering. He was no fool of a man. Life was not easy. Reb Zusha, number 2, was a holy man. Is his remarkable attitude attainable for ordinary people? And 3, if yes, is this a desirable, normal, and healthy attitude for the average person?
Yes.
So, with that, we're going to go to the PowerPoint. Wrong way. Next PowerPoint. Reb Zusha's attitude. Oh, these are the questions. Okay. Okay. Moving back to the lesson. All right, text number 3A. Actually, momentarily, we get to text 3A. Before I want to continue, I want to make 3 important points. Number 1, am I qualified to teach this lesson? Well, the reality is, I'm teaching it one way or the other. But in all seriousness, I regularly interact with people, try to counsel them, give them the best advice I can, etc. Sadly, over the years, over the decades at this point in my life, I have met too many people who have experienced tremendous suffering. And I can't begin to describe or even fathom the extent of the immense suffering that they've undergone. And frankly speaking, my heart breaks for them. In a certain respect, I almost feel unqualified to address their sufferings because thankfully, in many cases, I haven't experienced that level of suffering. And who am I to advise you how to live with your suffering when I don't necessarily relate to it on that same level? But bearing that in mind, since we're all on this journey, what I will aspire to do through the lesson here is to take the teachings of our sages throughout the Talmud and Hasidus, etc., and tell you what they have to say regarding suffering. There are a number of people about whom we're going to speak of this evening. One of them is, which we'll get to shortly, I'm just going to give you a little prelude. One is Nachum Ish Gamzu. He was a man, just to give you a little historical perspective, who was blind in both eyes, had his hands and legs were amputated, and his skin was covered with boils, and he lived in abject poverty. So says the Talmud. That's the Nachum Ish Gamzu, who we're going to get to in a little bit. Rabbi Akiva, the famed Rabbi Akiva, lived through the Churban Bayesheni, the destruction of the Second Temple. He also suffered extreme poverty. He was ostracized by his family. He lost 2 of his sons in his lifetime, 24,000 of his students in a period of 4.5 weeks, and was imprisoned toward the end of his lifetime and was publicly executed in the most gruesome fashion. And then we have the Baal Shem Tov, who was orphaned. He was the founder of Hasidism. He was orphaned by both of his parents at the age of 5. And then the Alter Rebbe, the founder of Chabad Hasidus, who lost his daughter, who was a young mother of a young child during his lifetime, amongst many other experiences of suffering. Those are 4 people that we're going to quote throughout the lesson over here. We tell a joke about a rabbi gets a phone call in the middle of the night. So he rubs his eyes, he checks his time, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. He's wondering, who in the world's calling me at 3 o'clock in the morning? So the rabbi picks up the phone and he hears the voice of one of the members of his congregation. So the guy says, Rabbi, you got to help me out. I've been arrested for tax evasion and I'm in jail together with a bunch of addicts and criminals. I don't know what to do. So the rabbi says to him, listen, I'll do what I can to help you. Don't worry, everything's going to be okay. So later on, when the congregant was let out on bail, the rabbi says to him, tell me, I'm just curious, why did you call me at 3 o'clock in the morning? Why don't you call a lawyer? So the man says, are you crazy? Call a lawyer at 3 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah, what will charge?
Anyway, yeah, exactly. The question is, to whom do we apply the teachings of this lesson? And the answer is to ourselves. We're not looking, God forbid, to become apathetic in any way, shape, or form, or callous, excuse me, to other people's pains and hardships. We're simply looking for perspectives and ways to remain like in an emotionally positive space, despite our own hardships. And with God's help, we're going to discuss a bit of this more toward the end of the lesson. So the question, last thing I want to address here is, when should we apply these ideas? As we study through this lesson, you may think there's no way in heaven I'm going to be able to implement these ideas or perspectives in my own life. So I'm going to ask you to suspend your judgment or judgment to be in that area until we deal with the issues head on toward the end of the lesson itself. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, my disclaimers. As we said, the question that's going to drive today's lesson is, how do I maintain happiness and avoid negative emotions? When I'm suffering from forms of hardship or illnesses, and I worry about what the future is going to bring in these areas, it's an emotional question and problem. Now, lurking in the background, however, is, and I'm going to get to the next PowerPoint here. Bear with me. There we go. Lurking in the background is an underlying theological question, what's called theodicy, which basically, the question would be, is why would a loving God make us suffer? We talk about God being benevolent, kind, all the 13 attributes of mercy, etc. Why would a loving God make us suffer? And the truth is that this course is not a course on theodicy. It's not, and frankly speaking, I couldn't address all those questions. But we will see that we have to address the philosophical question in order to be able to resolve the emotional issues, of which most of these are. Because the ultimate pain derives not so much from the hardship itself, but from not understanding from the get-go why these things are happening.
This side?
So the issue, Zuchi and my grandson, we're still hearing you loud and clear. Hello? Anyway,
Gesundheit.
Gesundheit. I'm glad that she's on because the moment I figured I've lost track how to manipulate through all these buttons here. I need them. Anyway, the issue of theodicy was explained in previous courses. In this course, we're going to, as I mentioned earlier, turn to the Tanya, the Bible, Chabad Hasidus, for a unique response, one which is in line with some of the other GLI courses that some of you have taken. So here is essentially how the Alter Rebbe addressed this question. Text number 2, I'm on the wrong. Text 2. The following, on page 143, the following advice on cleansing one's heart of all sadness and of every trace of worry about mundane matters, even about one's family, health, and livelihood. There's a well-known statement of our sages, just as we bless God for the good, so should we bless him for misfortune. So the Talmud in Brachot explains that we should accept misfortune with joy, in the same way that we rejoice over visible and overt goodness. That sounds like a great thing to do, but it may be a very tall order and above most of our pay grades, right? I mean, and sometimes I should say perhaps often, we're upset over the fact that we lack extras or luxuries, and we don't need the Tanya necessarily to contend with these emotions. We simply have to realize that we have great blessings, especially living in this great country, where we have almost a sense of entitlement in many cases. And relative to many other countries of the world, we're not doing badly. Okay, so I don't need the Tanya necessarily to tell me about what's the problem there. So often, minimal reflection is enough to understand that many of what we perceive to be urgent needs are not essential or urgent at all, but a product of our desire to keep a certain status quo, to compete with not the Jones, the Cohens, because those are the Jewish people next door, all right, or other various members of social circles and strata. So in different words, our needs are oftentimes simply a result of our unnecessary expectations, as has been spoken about in many different places, all right? So if and when this is the case, the solution is lowering our expectations and focusing on the fact that our true needs are really being met. I'll just give you a very simple, almost an obvious example. Shouldn't need it, but we go to the doctor's office, right? So Baruch Hashem, we have fairly decent healthcare in this country. It's not perfect, but nonetheless, relative to many other countries, we have a pretty decent system. When we call to the doctor and we're made to wait for 2 hours, how do you feel about that? I can tell you how I'm feeling. I'm like jumping out of my skin. I'm thinking, I know the doctor's busy, but so am I. And I got a lot of other things to do and a lot of other places to be. All right, which is a natural reaction. It's like, I had an appointment. You have an appointment with me. One day I'm thinking I should tell the doctor, you come to me, I'll make you wait for 2 hours. How do you see how you feel about it, right? I wouldn't say that. But that's a reaction many people have. You get upset. But what we forget is, thank God, at least there's a place to go. There's hopefully a decent doctor to help you out. Many other countries, there's no doctor. And if there is a doctor, there's one doctor for, God knows, 1 million people. And everybody's waiting in line, even can get into line, etc. It's one small example amongst many others. Here, the Alter Rebbe is going to discuss real needs, not perceived needs. Real needs, issues that people have with their family, their children, or God forbid, not having children, with health issues, which are obviously very germane to today, or the loss, God forbid, of a loved one, or real financial pressures, which are also hitting our economy terribly right now. People are suffering. So the Alter Rebbe directs us to a Mishnah that tells us that we need to bless God for the painful experiences just as we do for the pleasurable ones. So the Talmud clarifies that the just as doesn't mean that we say the same blessing for both, because that would be like, that's crazy. How do you say the same blessing for both? It would make no sense. When something good or pleasurable happens, we recite the Hatov HaMeitiv, which translates in English, he who is good and does good. Or we say Shehechiyanu, the blessing Shehechiyanu that you're familiar with, who has sustained us and allow us to arrive at this occasion. When we hear sad or, God forbid, distressing news or bad news, as we call it, we recite Dayan HaEmet, which basically means he who is the true judge. So it means that what this means is that we accept both the pleasurable and painful experiences with equal gladness and equanimity, even though they're separate blessings. So the question is, how is that possible? That's all good on paper, and the Gemara, the Talmud, has great ideas. But I'm not a Talmudist, and I didn't live 1,500 years ago in the times of the Talmud. I'm living in 2020 in the United States of America. How do I relate to this? So with that, we'll move to the next PowerPoint that I might be able to find here. That's the one. Why do bad things happen to good people? The age-old question, which I'm sure you've heard many times. So the question would be more on target if we omitted the first word and asked instead, do bad things happen to good people? Not the why. Replace the why with the word do. Do bad things happen to good people? So I'm going to explain why that's so. There's a theme expressed in the scriptures and the Psukim time and again that God loves us, right? We see this in many places, in davening, throughout the prophets and other places. And in fact, there's a whole book in the Tanakh called Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, which is devoted to describing God's immense or intense love that he has for us and our love for him. That's really most of the book of Song of Songs is largely metaphoric, but it's all about the love and the relationship we have with Hashem and that God has with us. So the prophet Malachi expresses this idea very simply and succinctly in text 3a on page, what page are we? 144. It says, God's message to Israel delivered by Malachi or Malachi, I love you, says God. Okay. Text 3b, God appeared to remind me of the love he showed our ancestors in Egypt long ago, and he instructed me to deliver the following message. My love for you is eternal. I therefore extend to you my loving kindness. Another good one. Let's go to 3c on page 145. God's love, this is from the Baal Shem Tov, it was written in Yiddish. God's love for each of us individually is comparable to the love that elderly parents have for their only child who was born to them in their latter years, and even greater than that. So simple question, why does it have to say even greater than that? I mean, that's a pretty good love, no? If someone waited for decades and decades to have a child and they're blessed with a child in their senior years, that's not good. That's not good enough. So the answer why it says, and even greater than that, is because just as God is infinite, so is everything about Hashem infinite, and so is his love to us infinite. The problem is that we, being finite beings, cannot comprehend the infinite. So the Baal Shem Tov, in an attempt to convey some inkling, I guess, if you will, about what's going on, at least of the enormity of God's love for each of us, gave us the above example. And it's an imperfect example, but it's the best one possible. So for those of you who are listening that are parents, if you were to take a moment to consider this, reflect on how much you love your children and understand that your love for your child is only a fraction of the love that God has for you, and extrapolate from there. So if God loves us as a parent loves a child, and more so, then it's clear that he wouldn't let anything bad happen to us, right? Just as loving parents would never willingly allow something bad to happen to their child. So in truth, there's really a fundamental difference between the love of parents for their children and God's love for us. And not only in the magnitude of the love, because ours is limited and God is infinite, but also in terms of the efficacy of the love. What does that mean? Mortal parents, regardless of how much they love their child and how well-intentioned they be, cannot control all circumstances. You know that, right? You want the best for your kid. You try to give them the best instructions you can. You hope they'll listen to you. And when they don't, you hope they don't tell you until they're much older and they say everything was fine. You'll never believe what happened when I was 17 or whatever. Okay. So the reality is parents cannot completely prevent their child from, God forbid, becoming ill. We try, we give them, we try to make sure they eat healthy and you wash your hands and you put on a sweater even when it's 90 degrees outside because your mother said so. And, you get them inoculated. If you do shots, you don't do shots, whatever it is, you do your best to make sure the kid's healthy. Can we always control the health of our children? Unfortunately not. And the same thing applies when they get older and they get married. Can we always somehow insulate a child against a bad relationship or a problematic relationship? No, as much as we'd love to. The old saying about parents is once you marry for your child, to ensure that you're going to have a happy relationship with your children, you keep your mouth shut and your checkbook open. And it works very well, okay? It does. It's worked for thousands of years. And it's not always easy because the instinct, no, you're doing it wrong. Don't do this. Trust me, that's not the best way to go about things. We can talk, that's another class for in and of itself. That's at least a 24-hour conversation. So moving back to what I was saying. So your hardship and pain, regardless of what they are being allowed by the same God that harbors this infinite love for you and would certainly never hurt you. It seems like a walking dichotomy. How could it be? How could the same being give me both? So we have a conclusion that we come to, that there can only be two types of experiences. Number one, or A, are experiences that are good and feel good, and B, experiences that are good but don't feel good. They're good in the long run, but they just don't feel good. Or in different words, revealed good and hidden good or concealed good. And that is ultimately the conclusion of the Alter Rebbe. We'll see that in the following, there we go. Oh, there's the PowerPoint, más o menos, I think. Finite love and infinite love. Hello? There we go. Okay. So with that, I'm going to go to text number 4 on page 145. The Talmud explains that we should accept misfortune with joy in the same way that we rejoice over visible and overt goodness. For the misfortune is likewise for the good, although its goodness is not apparent and visible to mortal eyes. All right, listen, sounds good. That's a difficult pill to swallow, I got to tell you. But nonetheless, so it says. Hold that thought before we get on to the next text. The question that we come up with, almost an obvious question, is how in the world can suffering and hardship be good? You know anybody who says, bring it on, I want more. Give me some more. God, you didn't give me enough hardship and suffering yet. Bring it on. Most people in their right mind don't say that. In fact, actually every day in davening, in the morning blessings, we specifically ask God not to bring us into further tests. We have enough tests as it is. We don't need more trials and tribulations. So what is that supposed to mean? As mentioned, there's several ways to understand this. We're going to give you several perspectives leading up to the Alter Rebbe's approach as expounded upon in Tanya towards the end of this lesson. So in the text we just read, we encountered the words Gam Zu Latova. This too is for the good, right? We read that in the Gemara. And it's a popular Jewish refrain, often repeated when there's difficulty and suffering, etc. So there's actually a famous Talmudic story that illustrates this idea that everything is ultimately for the good, and that's text number 5. A teaching attributed to Rabbi Akiva. We should make a habit of constantly declaring whatever God does is for the best. And this is illustrated by an incident in which Rabbi Akiva was traveling. He arrived at a certain city. He sought lodging for the night, but no one was willing to host him. So what did he say? Gam Zu Latova. Whatever God does is for the best. And he went to sleep for the night in a field. So he says he had a rooster, a donkey, and a candle. A sudden gust of wind extinguished his candle. A wild cat ate his rooster, and a lion then devoured his donkey. And what did he say? Gam Zu Latova. Whatever God does is for the best. That's what he told himself. So during that night, now here you're out alone in the middle of nowhere. It's pitch black. There's wild animals. I mean, how would you feel? Probably really good, huh? So during the night, an army attacked the city, taking all its residents captive. Rabbi Akiva later recounted this experience and told the students, did I not tell you that whatever God does is for the best? That's what the Gemara tells us, the story of Rabbi Akiva. There is a story, it's not in your text here, but I'll tell you the story. I don't know if you ever heard of the author named Yafa Eliach. There's a book that she authored called Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust. So she tells the following story, or writes the following story, that there was once a gentleman who had a little sister who was the most beautiful girl on the earth. In his mind, in her body and soul, absolutely beautiful person. And he felt there was no way, nothing in this world was too difficult for me to do for my sister, he says. So when the Germans occupied our town, we hid her, for we knew that we'd take her away. The moment they saw her, they'd take her away. One day, we were returning home, he writes, and it was like this strange silence that was hung in the streets. And the closer we got to the building, we can see that something is wrong. And when we got there, we discovered that the door to our room had been broken down or broken in, and everything was gone, looted, and so was my sister. So the neighbors had told us that she was taken by the Gestapo. Without thinking, I ran to the Gestapo. My mother begged me to return. She says, I don't want to lose 2 children in the same day. I said, I'm going. So I ran. And I ran to the Gestapo building. It was always like the most natural thing to do for a Jewish kid to go running to the Gestapo building willingly. And I was greeted by this young soldier at the desk. And he said to me, what's your wish, Jew? To be shot now? Because if you're in a hurry, I can definitely accommodate you. So I said to him, you took my sister, give me back my sister. So the German burst into wild laughter. And suddenly he stops laughing. And he said, you know what, Jew? I'll let your beautiful sister go on one condition. If right now you can grow hair on the back of your hand, on the palm of your hand. So I opened up my palm and it was covered with black hair. Right away, this Gestapo's man's face twisted into this horrible grimace and he began to shout hysterically, you Jewish Satan, take your sister before I machine gun the two of you and get out of here. And I grabbed my sister's hand and ran home to tell my parents that I got my sister back, and from there, we fled to the forest. So the young boy who's telling his story says, you see, what happened was that I worked in a factory, and my hand was once caught in a machine. And it was a terrible accident, and doctors tell me today that this, ultimately, they managed somehow to save his shattered hand, and he says, I still marvel at that. And then he says that apparently what they did was they grafted skin onto my palm from a hairy part of my body. And in my late teens, I began to grow hair on my palm. And doctors tell me today this is impossible. And I tell them the palm of my hand did not go to medical school. That's exactly what happened. So here you have, the inconceivable. Somehow, most people, if they had hair growing in their palms, they'd be running to the doctor. Something's definitely wrong. And here, ultimately, it saved his sister's life. So earlier, we compared God to a loving parent. At times, parents deliberately choose to do things that cause discomfort or even pain for their children. For example, you take your kids to get their shots. You inoculate them. I don't know how many kids enjoy getting shots. Most of them don't. Often they're crying, they're getting nervous, it hurts, whatever it is. But we do it anyway. Okay, and ultimately because this is hopefully going to inoculate them against disease and deprive them of unhealthy pleasures. We discipline our kids when they don't want to be disciplined. And this isn't, we ask them to do household chores, take out the garbage, make your bed. Terrible things we ask our kids to do. Torture, absolute torture. But this isn't despite their love for their child. It's because of your love for the child. That's why you're doing it. Due to the great fact that the parents have greater maturity and wisdom, they can see the benefits in being gained in what is these uncomfortable and painful experiences. These are not benefits that children will understand or comprehend in any way until ultimately they get older. So in similar vein, even while suffering and regardless of the circumstances, we can and we should trust God and understand that Hashem, who loves us more than anyone else and anything else, certainly has a good and beneficial ending in mind. There's one more PowerPoint here, I think. That was the conclusion of that one. That's the inoculations. All right. All right, text number 6. Sorry, I moved too fast here. How to get back? 6. No, that's 7. Text number 6. I'm just going to have a little Chaim first. Chaim. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro.
Amen.
We want to thank Canada Dry, one of the co-sponsors of this evening's class. I'm joking. All right. Isn't that what they do on the, on the shows? They use whatever brand it may be for branding purposes.
They've got a vodka brand now.
They do. Canada Dry?
Well, I don't know that it's Canada Dry.
I will stick with the tried and true.
Yeah.
All right, text number 6 from the Talmud. People refer to Nachum Ish Gamzu. He was the gentleman we spoke about earlier who had both his hands and his feet chopped off, boils over his skin, horrible life. People refer to Nachum Ish Gamzu because whatever happened to him, he would respond, Gamzu Latova. This is also for good. Once the Jews needed to send a gift to the Caesar, they told each other who should go to Rome bearing the gift on our behalf. Let us send Nachum Ish Gamzu because he regularly experiences miracles. They sent him off with a chest filled with precious stones and jewels. On his way, he stopped at an inn for the night. During that night, the innkeepers removed all of the precious stones and jewels and refilled the chest with soil. The next morning, Nachum realized what happened, but he simply declared, this is also for the good. When he arrived at the Caesar's palace and presented his gift on behalf of the Jewish nation, they opened the chest and saw that it was filled with soil. The Jews are mocking me, roared the Caesar. He was about to execute Nachum and the Jews who accompanied him, but Nachum simply declared, this is also for the good. Elijah the prophet suddenly appears before the Caesar disguised as one of his ministers. He told the Caesar, perhaps this soil is the kind that their ancestor Abraham used in battle. He threw earth at enemy armies and it turned into swords that fell upon his opponents. He threw stubble and it turned into arrows. It's a story in Chumash. So the Caesar was eager to try it out. There was a province that the Romans were unable to conquer. They tested the soil by throwing it at their enemies and thereby conquered the province, or that province. In gratitude, the Caesar instructed that Nachum's chest be refilled with precious stones and jewels from the royal treasury. They sent him back home with great honor.
Wow.
Hold on. And now for the rest of the story. Well, you don't know the rest of the story. The rest of the story it's not written over here from the Gemara, but basically what happened was that on the way back, he stopped at the same inn, and the owners of the inn came out and said, hey, what did you bring to the Caesar? He said, well, I brought whatever you guys filled it with over here. They said, really? He says, yeah. And what happened? He says, well, it turned into these, swords, spears, etc., conquered the enemy. So sure enough, the innkeepers basically destroyed their inn, dug up all the earth beneath it, filled up a bunch of chests with this dirt, and took it to the Caesar and told him, this is the same earth that this guy Nachum Ish Gamzu came with to defeat the enemies. Needless to say, they took it out to the battlefield to try it, and it failed miserably, and that was the end of these innkeepers. They were both killed. That was the end of the story.
Once they have to, once I tell them that I know.
Oh, so okay. So does this story sound the same as the previous one with Rabbi Akiva? Both stories involve like a frightful turn of events. One of them, Rabbi Akiva is stuck in the field. He loses his rooster, his candle, etc., his donkey. And both have unanticipated positive results or endings. But in reality, there's a fundamental difference between the two of them. What is the difference? Text number 7. There is a distinction between the stories of Rabbi Akiva and Nachum Ish Gamzu. Rabbi Akiva suffered loss and pain. He lost his donkey, his rooster. He sat in the dark, and he spent the night in a field. True, it was for the sake of a positive outcome, but the experience itself was painful. By contrast, Nachum Ish Gamzu never suffered any harm. To the contrary, if he had presented precious stones and jewels, it is uncertain whether the Caesar would have valued the gift. After all, there was no shortage of precious stones in the royal treasury. The soil that he brought, on the other hand, was indeed greatly appreciated. Rabbi Akiva endured hardship, but the hardship spared him from far greater hardship. Nachum Ish Gamzu's experience was itself a positive one.
What happens if the market on.
So we move on to the various figures over here. I'm going to have a number of these along through the course. There's a saying, you've heard of Warren Buffett. He's my financial advisor. And he's famous for saying that in the business world, the rear view mirror is always clearer than the windshield. So the litmus test to determine whether a particular event was of the Rabbi Akiva type or the Nachum Ish Gamzu type is to ask, had I known in advance how the story would end, would have I experienced any pain and distress at all? If I knew the end result, would I have experienced any pain or distress? So Rabbi Akiva's story, the answer is yes. And Nachum, because he physically went through pain and suffering. Nachum Ish Gamzu's story, the answer is no. So at times, our experiences appear to be negative, when in fact they're nothing but good. But for whatever reason, we can't appreciate the goodness at that time. For example, imagine a person giving their 2-year-old a golden coin for Hanukkah geld instead of the chocolate coins. So at that moment, the kid's too immature to understand that nothing bad has happened, but the kid's thinking, what am I going to do with this? I can't eat this. What do I want this for? Instead,
Daddy will handle it.
what? Yeah, exactly. It's the parent giving it to the child, though. So the kid was fortunate to get something worth probably thousands of times more than the chocolate, but he just doesn't get it. So with that, we're going to move on to a video, which, or not. I don't know. Zushi, how do we do the video here? We may or may not see the video here, ladies and gentlemen, today, because I have no idea how to get to the video part here.
You're doing fine, Rob. Don't worry about it.
Rabbi, use 4 fingers to swipe all the way to the right. The video should be there waiting. There you go. That's it. Press play.
And that is exactly what I was looking for. How did you know?
Once upon a parable, there was a boy named David who pondered the production of bread. Off he went to the bakery, where he learned that bread came from grain, which was supplied by a farmer. Off he went to the farm, where he found a field covered with wild greenery. He stood there admiring the pleasant sight. Wild grasses nodded in the breeze. Just then, a burly farmer arrived with what looked like a contraption of mass destruction. To David's horror, the farmer began attacking the field. He dug it up, brutally overturning grass and flowers, leaving rows of dirty, lifeless trenches in their place. "Stop!" cried David. "What are you doing? You're wrecking your beautiful field." The farmer flashed a giant grin. "Wait and see," he responded mysteriously. "Come back tomorrow at noon." The next day, David found the farmer strolling among fresh furrows, casting handfuls of seed here and there. "What's that?" he asked in wonder. "Grain," came the gruff reply. "Oh my!" exclaimed David. "Grain costs a pretty penny. Please don't throw it onto the ground." The farmer roared with laughter. "You'll have to wait a couple of months to see what it's all about." David did just that. He returned to find tremendous stalks of golden wheat. "Wonderful!" he exclaimed. "It's even better than before." "Told ya," came the farmer's familiar voice. "Now, watch this." The harvest began. The farmer felled the wheat with gusto. "Not again!" yelped David in confusion. "Didn't you spend months preparing this stuff? Now you're back to square one, with destroyed vegetation and an empty field." "You're a riot," grinned the farmer. "Come along to the mill. You'll get the picture." When they arrived at the mill, things got a lot worse. "Why are you grinding everything into dust? That's totally pointless and heartless." "Hold your horses," growled the farmer. "I just need some water and you'll understand." The farmer kneaded the flour and water and lined up trays of dough in the shape of loaves, bread rolls, and braided challah. "That's amazing!" gushed David. "I finally get it. It was all for the sake of these marvelous creations." But then the farmer fired up a roaring oven and inserted the trays above the flames. And David began to yell, "Help! You'll burn it! I can't bear to watch this any longer." "Hang around a little longer," pleaded the farmer. And then, as the room filled with a warm, sweet, irresistibly mouth-watering aroma, David experienced the bright dawn of understanding. With the arrival of rows of soft, delicious, and highly nutritious, freshly baked bread.
You know, I forgot to put my name in there as the illustrator for this. Oh, well, anyway, little did you know about my great talents here. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next, hold on a second here. I got to get back.
Is that the vaccine for the coronavirus?
Yeah, hold on. One second, how do we get to the next one here? Bear with me for a second. Oh, I know, I'm in the wrong thing here. That's what I'm up to. Okay, thank you. So let's just go back to figure 4.1. A, the Jewish view of hardship and suffering. I'm doing this simply because there's a number of different illustrations here using these paradigms. So paradigm A, hindsight understanding, hardship leads to greater pain in paradigm A. In paradigm B, hardship is goodness in disguise. And figure 4.1b, the Jewish view of hardship and suffering, take 2. So you have paradigm A. These letters are too small for my eyes. I don't know. Okay. Paradigm A, hindsight understanding. Hardship leads to greater gain. Paradigm B, hardship is goodness in disguise. Does negativity exist? In A, yes, albeit as a vehicle for good. In paradigm B, it does not. Our perception of hardship in paradigm A is mostly correct. In B, it's incorrect. And lastly, our reaction to negative circumstances. In paradigm A, we tolerate it. In B, we actually appreciate it. And with that, actually, you can go to the, is this one here? That we can trust. Hang on a second. Bear with me here. Lesson video. We just did that. There you go. Here's all the various. Okay. So just to give you a brief explanation as to what we just said. Paradigm A, we speak about negativity existing, although it's only a means to an end, the end ultimately is positive, as we explained, which brings to mind the Hasidic idiom known as Yerida Tzorach Aliyah, which really translates as every descent is for the sake of an ascent. Bad, or Yerida, exists, but it isn't in conflict with the good, which is subsequent Aliyah, the subsequent ascent. It complements and enables it. In paradigm B, negativity does not exist. Consequently, in paradigm A, when we experience something negative, we don't have to have our eyes checked because it's negative. That's the way we experience it. And that's how we accurately perceive the situation for what it is. It's an authentic negative experience. Although we have to keep in mind there's a greater good at the end that's somehow going to justify this negative experience. But there is, in truth, a difference between negative and positive experiences, with the former only leading to the latter. That was paradigm A. Paradigm B, on the other hand, when we experience something that seems to be negative, our perception is like impaired. And since we're limited as human beings, we simply don't see the situations for what they really are. We have like our own perception of what it is, and it's often incorrect. In this paradigm, the only difference between good and bad is our perception of them, because in reality, everything is good. We don't necessarily see it as good. And lastly, C, in paradigm A, we tolerate different or difficult situations, knowing that they will lead to something better. In paradigm B, we can actually appreciate difficult situations, knowing that in fact they are good. I guess, in fact, goodness in disguise. So the question is, when do we get to see this hindsight view? I'd always love to be able to look in the rearview mirror and see everything behind me, you know. But most of us don't get that opportunity. Sometimes in this world, you get to see it, and oftentimes you only get to see it in the world to come. In this world, sometimes all we can see is the bad. And sometimes we get to see how the bad leads to something good. And sometimes we never see how the bad itself is actually good. That's what it is. So moving on to the next section, where we speak about the hidden world, good versus great. We are, hold on a second, I gotta get to the next one here. Okay, was that the last thing? No. We're far from done. The reality is, in order to, we have still to get to the Tanya's unique approach to this topic, and we're going to explore a third paradigm, which is known as paradigm C. I hope you're all ready now for a bit of a dizzying exploration of the deepest mystical mysteries to the world. So hold on to your couches or wherever you're sitting. Everything that exists is born in God's mind. It's known as his chachma and bina, his wisdom and understanding. It's there where all the planning happens. Everything that happened and everything that will happen. So all the reasons, the goals, the objectives for every element of creation is to be found in God's infinite wisdom. Now, once God's plan is set, God has to put it into motion. And this necessitates the emanation of God's emotional attributes, as they're called, or midot. For example, chesed, kindness, or gevura, justice, or rachamim, compassion. So there are various energies that are deployed in the creation operation of the world, and these are known as the building blocks of creation. That's what they're called. These energies are funneled into God's speech, the tool that he uses to actually bring everything into existence. God said, let there be light, and there was light. God said, let there be coronavirus, and there was coronavirus.
Have a good night.
And he should stop saying that. All right, figure 4.2. Sorry, next one here.
You're the one that said it. We didn't.
I didn't hear anything. I didn't say anything either.
Okay.
I'll deny everything.
Okay.
Although this is being recorded, this is the first problem. All right, figure 4.2. The hidden and revealed worlds. The hidden world, divine intellectual attributes and reasons and objectives of creation. In the revealed world, divine emotional attributes and divine speech, and then energies deployed in creation, power of creation. So as you can see in this figure above, we divide the energies into two categories, the hidden world and the revealed world. When we speak here of hidden versus vis-a-vis revealed, we're not referring to that which the eye can see or cannot see per se. Rather, intellectual powers are essentially hidden. They're removed from the experience, except for the one who possesses the intellect. He or she is the only one who's actually able to connect to it. Emotions and speech, on the other hand, are revealed in as much as they are about the other entities and the other people. Emotions are how I feel about someone else, and speech is how I communicate with someone else. So in different words, I can think about and have opinions about another, but a relationship with another person, whether it's a good, a positive, or a negative relationship, only begins once I have feelings about them. Otherwise, there's nothing to talk about. It's not a relationship. So it is in the world of emotions and feelings where I emerge from the shell of my private hidden world and enter the world of someone else, wherein that person takes, all of a sudden that person takes on significance in my life. The same thing is true with God's attributes. His intellectual powers, they transcend creation. They're a part of God, and on that level, they are things that are on God's terms, on his terms, and they exist on a level that transcend any relationship to us, whether they be emotionally or practically. That constitutes what we're calling here the hidden world. The powers that actually relate to creation, our world down here, are God's emotions and speech. That's the revealed world. God's kindness to us, his justice, or whatever the story may be. They exist in order for God to interact with creation on its terms. What is all, okay, that all sounds good and fine. What does it have to do with hardships and sufferings? So we're going to continue where we left off with text number 4, back in the text itself on page 155. It says, this is from the Tanya. For quote, this is also for the good, except that it is not apparent and visible to mortal eyes, because it stems from the hidden world that is higher than the revealed world. So what is that supposed to mean? Hold on, I'm getting to the power, oops, wrong way. PowerPoint, there we go. Whenever there's two entities that are like on vastly different levels of either intelligence, wisdom, experience, the higher level, or I should say the one on the higher level, wants to express love and kindness to the one on the lower level. And there's two ways to do so. A, the kindness can be on the terms of the one on the higher level, right? The giver's hidden world, or the kindness can be on the terms of the one on the lower level, the giver's revealed world. For example, parents who want to express their love and care for their kids, the 3-year-old child, they can do the following. They can either A, deposit, I don't know, a few $1,000s in the child's college investment fund, or B, they can give the kid a lollipop, right? So in the first instance, the parents are doing good on their own terms. This is good for the parents too, and this is what the parents want, right? According to their advanced appreciation of ultimately what's going to be good for the child. The second one is the parents doing good according to the child's limited appreciation and wisdom, where at this time, right now, the kid's going to be much happier with the lollipop than another $3,000 or $5,000 put into the college fund. So objectively speaking, which of these two options is the greater good? They're both good, but which one's a greater good? So obviously the answer is the former one. Although it's going to be largely unappreciated by the kid, at least until they get older, or maybe not even after they get older, because I didn't want to go to college and you forced me to go to college, etc. Indeed, if the child appreciates the parent's kindness, then by definition, is the key. By definition, it is a lower good. Why? Because the kid, due to their limited understanding and an experience, has a very limited understanding of what goodness is. Now, not only does the kid often not appreciate the great kindness of the parents, at times the kids resent it. The kid may resent the fact that the parents sadistically are forcing him or her to go to school. You're sadistically forcing them to do homework. So although those are the greatest favors possible, you're giving kids a good education, you're giving them a discipline, you're giving them a drive, so on and so forth. But given any day, ask the kid. They'd much rather stay home, eat nosh, whatever junk food they can get their hands on, load up on sugar, and play computer games and watch TV all day. They'd much rather do that than go to school or do homework. So it's understandable, however, that the parents will express their love for the children in both ways. If parents limit their expression strictly to the hidden world, then the kids will not sense the parents' love. So there's got to be complement between the two of them. You need the hidden world. You have to give them what you feel as the parent is best for them. At the same time, then you also have to give them the revealed world, the lollipop or whatever story may be. Because if you only give love to the revealed world variety, then ultimately the parents should be locked up for child abuse, because all you're doing is just giving your kid everything they want, and you're not giving them any substantive. You're not giving them an education, not taking care of their health, etc. So the same thing holds true with our relationship with God, but much more so. God is infinitely greater than us, and the chasm that separates our limited wisdom and understanding from Hashem's unlimited wisdom and understanding is infinite. And moreover, kids or children eventually grow up, you hope, and begin to understand and appreciate their parents' ways. It's often when they become parents themselves, they start to realize, oh, you know what? I really appreciate what you did for me when I was a kid. Now I see what you're going through, when they have their own kids. Earlier in the lesson, we explained that because God has infinite love for every one of us and also controls all the circumstances, so then there are only two types of experiences. One is experiences that are good and feel good, and then there are experiences that are good but don't feel good. And now we can better understand why it is that we have both types of experiences. The pleasant, the nice experience in our lives originate in God's revealed world. It's like the lollipop. I appreciate it. I like this. I got a sweet tooth. You made me happy now. They feel great, but they're limited in terms of the form of goodness. On the other hand, we cannot appreciate the goodness in an event or experience that is often at times painful, right? Or we're going through suffering. We're saying, God, this is your goodness. This is goodness. I don't need this. But that would be equated with God investing in our college fund. It's coming from the hidden good. It's God doing good for us on his terms, a goodness that's so great that we can't appreciate it. And that leads us to a whole different understanding of suffering and hardship. In paradigms A and B, hardship is also good, either because it leads to a positive outcome or because it in and of itself is really, it's goodness in disguise. In paradigm B, or C rather, it's an infinitely greater good. It's infinite goodness on the terms of an infinite God. We cannot understand it. We will not understand it. God is giving his goodness in the way he understands it. And that leads us to this remarkable conclusion that we can be happy not only despite hardship and pain, but because of them. Now, it might sound like a tall statement. I'm going to get on to figure 401. Where we can see the various different paradigms, A, B, and C. You can just read them to yourselves. I don't have to reread the same paradigm. All right, so there's more to the story. Until now, our question was, I'm suffering hardships, I have pain, or tragedy. What kind of benefit can this possibly bring me? We've answered the question in 3 different ways. Number one, either the difficulty will bring us eventual benefit, or it in and of itself is intrinsically beneficial, or its benefit and goodness is greater even than any revealed good in my life. In other words, it's on God's terms and I cannot understand it. Ultimately, however, the discussion was all about framing hardship in the concept and in the context of our good and our benefit. So now we're ready for the next paradigm, paradigm D, and it takes us in a whole different direction completely. We're up to text number 9, back to the Tanya. It says as follows: the joy a person experiences due to suffering is a consequence of one's desiring God's closeness more than anything offered by life in this world. As it's written, quote, "For your loving kindness is dearer than life." It's a pretty tall statement. It's from the book of Psalms. "And the nearness of God is infinitely stronger and more sublime in the hidden world." So the Alter Rebbe is quoting a verse here from chapter 63 of Psalms, which begins with the words, "a song by David." Incidentally, this particular psalm was composed when David was in the Judean desert, and he was fleeing for his life from his father-in-law, King Saul, who wanted to kill him. So here's David. He finds refuge in this hot, arid part of southern Israel, out in the desert, the Negev as we call it. And in this psalm, David describes his pain as being banished from civilization, and more importantly, from the Mishkan, from the tabernacle, which is or was the spiritual center of the Jewish nation. And he says, quote, "O God, you are my God, how I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My body longs for you in an arid and thirsty land without water. As I saw you in the sanctuary, so do I long to see your strength and your glory." And then what does King David say? He proclaims, quote, "For your loving kindness is dearer than life. My lips shall praise you." You're going to say, all right, I'm not King David, and I'm not quite ready to do this yet. I mean, I take my hat off to King David. He didn't have an easy life at that point, and he definitely, he somehow came up with this great and heartfelt prayer to Hashem. David recognized that his suffering stemmed from the hidden world. You'll know that David did not say, it's all fine. It's all right. It must be deeper, greater good. It's goodness on God's terms, goodness so awesome that I can't fully appreciate it. I can only imagine the great benefit that it's going to bring me one day. David doesn't say any of that. Rather, he says, quote, "This is an altogether different type of good. It's a goodness that is dearer than anything life has to offer, dearer even than life itself." So the goodness, or that goodness, is nearness to God, intimacy with God, the ultimate loving kindness. So you see the advantage of being a beneficiary of God's hidden world is not only that the goodness and benefit derived from there are greater and deeper. It's not about what's good or better or best for me. None of that was of any interest to King David. What mattered to him was nearness to God. That's what he wanted. His truest desire was to be in a relationship with God. And the greater the intimacy, the more his thirsty soul rejoiced. So King David understood that because suffering and hardship come from the hidden world, the sufferer is closer to God. To him, that closeness was dearer than life. So if you consider this, that let's say you would give lollipops to every kid in shul or every kid on the block, but you would only deposit the thousands of dollars into the college fund for your kid or someone else who's near and dear to you. Why? Because your hidden world is a far greater expression of nearness and intimacy, and it's reserved ultimately for people you deem worthy of that, but not for everybody. David wasn't considering the nature of the gift. Although the gifts from the hidden world are in fact greater, but the love and closeness enclosed in the gift. That's what he wanted. He didn't care about the gift. I just want the love and the closeness. So there's actually a haunting song, or a Hasidic song, attributed to the great Hasidic master Rabbi Yitzchak Mibarditchev, who was a colleague of Reb Zusha Vanapoleon Alter Rebbe. And he very poignantly expresses this idea. That's text number 10.
May I ask you a question?
Sure.
It's a little bit strange. I fully understand what you're saying, but the comparison with the lollipop and the college fund to something bad is I don't see it because both the college fund and the lollipop is a good thing.
So that's
None of those things per se is a bad thing. While I see that the little child, of course, rather has the lollipop than the $1,000 because it's instant gratification. Still, both those things are good.
Yeah.
So, do you see what I'm saying?
Yes, but that's exactly the point. Is that even what we perceive as not being good in our life right now is also good. Like that money going into the child, the college fund, which the kid doesn't appreciate and doesn't see the goodness in it.
But not getting a lollipop.
There's instant gratification, what they're calling revealed good and concealed good. Revealed good is a lollipop, right? It makes me happy now. The concealed good is putting money in the kid's college fund, and the kid doesn't appreciate any of it right now whatsoever. It means nothing to him. He much rather
Right.
the lollipop. In this case, the pain and suffering. So there's pain and suffering when I know there's going to be a good outcome. Fine. So I see there's going to be good to it. Then there's pain and suffering where I don't see the outcome, and I don't understand why it's good. But ultimately, somehow, it's also good in God's world. It's the hidden world of God. And not something that we can understand because we're finite, God's infinite, but that also is good. It's not an easy level to live by on a daily basis.
I see it, and I'll let you go on. My problem is just that with what's going on right now.
So I'm going to get to that towards the end of the class.
The lollipop and the college is good.
No, I understand. So,
there's nothing good right now about what to bring that example.
So
it's not even a lollipop.
Hold on to your question. It's a great question. I will try to address it when we get to the end of the course and hopefully get some more light on it. Okay? So text number 10. These are the lyrics of the song. Master of the universe, I'd like to sing to you a song all about you. Master of the universe, I'd like to play you a melody all about you. Where are you to be found, O God? Where are you not to be found, O God? Up, there you are. Down, that's you. To the east, it's you. To the west, it's you. To the north, you. To the south, you. You. When things are good, that's you. And when they're not, that's also you. But since it's you, it is good. You.
Yeah.
So every hardship is simply God's loving embrace, albeit in disguise. And Rabbi Steinsaltz, I assume you've heard of him, or Evan Yisrael Steinsaltz, eloquently expresses this idea in text 11, which is pretty profound. He says the following, to say, that's page 159, to say this too is for the best, and this kind of, to some degree, addresses your quandary, Esther, is hardly the same thing as superficial optimism. It's a recognition of the reality of pain and evil and an attempt to get to the root of suffering, to get beyond the fact that everything bad has something good in it, and that salvation often emerges from tribulation. There's no longer any consideration of the ultimate profit or hidden goodness in the reality of suffering. Besides, what kind of release or consolation resides in the thought that the pain will pass? One who is in agony of body or spirit can hardly be made to feel better by philosophical religious ideas. Don't tell me that now I'm in pain. I'm not interested in your philosophy. The Jew who sincerely faces suffering does not seek an accounting with God. He does not reproach divine justice or defend his own innocence, nor does he seek ways of reaping some advantage. He relates entirely to the present, to that which is now, not to what was in the past or what is liable to be in the future. No solace is sought or vain imaginings. If God wills it, the situation will improve. Otherwise, it's none of my business. The argument is that since suffering is something that comes from God, it is in the nature of a gift, or at least something that is given. Because, to be sure, not everything that is given can, at first sight, be recognized as something positive. And this takes a lot of time, a great deal of tumultuous repudiation before one reaches a relatively peaceful state of equilibrium. So I'm going to move to the next, hold on a second here. The next graph, figure 4.1d. The Jewish view of hardship and suffering, take 4. which you can kind of read through on your own. As you're reading through that, up to this point, we were struggling with the question of whether our perception of hardship is accurate. Is it really bad, or is it goodness, or even a greater goodness in disguise? But now we've arrived at the point where the question becomes irrelevant. We're no longer looking for gifts. We're looking for love. This is the highest level, the last paradigm. Whether or not hardship is real, we're after something else entirely, something so much deeper. The ultimate way to deal with pain and suffering is not by reframing the suffering as something else, but by changing. In other words, you can't say it's not suffering. You could say whatever you want. Suffering is suffering. You can reframe it as saying, well, it's good that the suffering ultimately is going to mean goodness. It's all fine. But there's a whole different way of thinking. And that is, I should say, by changing our goal and focus in life in general. So we're now at the point where we can make complete sense of Reb Zusha's attitude, the initial text that we read about, the gentleman coming to this man who was so poor and asking him about pain and suffering. Now we can understand his attitude and response. He never experienced suffering, not because he understood that the suffering was a gift or a disguise. It wasn't like he said, oh, this is just God's gift to me, or, there's going to be a goodness at the end of this whole story. It's simply because his focus wasn't on gifts in the first place. His whole focus in life wasn't about, God, what are you going to give me? Or what are you not going to give me? So let me see if I can get, sorry, wrong way. There we did these, you kind of saw. Is hardship bad? There we go. Okay. So as mentioned, 1 second.
Wish I hadn't gotten a prostate. Can't sleep every night because of it. Risk your life.
Hold on. I don't know what I'm doing here. Sorry. Right. I guess the course is over. I'm just joking. I don't know what I did here with the PowerPoint. Oh, I'm on the wrong side. That's what it is. It's important to be on the right side. Forget the,
You can click from beginning now, go through it, or you can scroll down to the slide that you need.
How do I scroll down? Oh, here. I see.
Use that bar there.
Yeah, I'm really good at this, folks. You know that now.
Drag it down to wherever you need it.
How do you, oh, there we go.
And then just click the slide you want, and then on top of that, do from current slide.
From current slide.
And boom, you're good to go.
And
Now there's nothing there.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think you need to click to go through it. Does that make sense?
The blue screen.
That's a nice blue stain.
There we go. Isn't that beautiful?
Yes.
Okay. All right. As we mentioned a few times, this course is about moving away from negative emotions to positive ones by shifting our alignment and identification from what's known as although it's not so much about this. In this course, we didn't discuss it that much, but it's something known as the natural soul or the animal soul to the godly soul, the divine soul. Then the natural soul, the animal soul, every Jew has two souls. So the natural/animal soul seeks gratification and pleasure. And obviously it detests any form of discomfort and pain. The natural soul has the ability to delay gratification, but it certainly prefers instant gratification. I want it now. Nevertheless, the natural soul can be taught to cope with suffering through any of the first three paradigms that we discussed today, provided that it is inculcated with belief and trust in Hashem and God and in his omnipotence and love for all of us. In paradigm D, that's reserved strictly for the divine soul. Only the divine soul can value closeness to Hashem more than any personal gratification. This is not something for the faint of heart. Let's see if I can get back here. 4.3, you can read that one too.
This goes blank.
If you want to look through.
Don't erase it. It is there.
All right.
Did you erase your WhatsApp?
So now we've concluded the primary thesis of this lesson. It's time for the big question. We explored four different perspectives on hardship and suffering. What obstacles might we face in applying these perspectives to our own lives? Number one, this whole thing is not easy. None of it's easy, not even the first paradigm, let alone the fourth one. But the question is, what are the alternatives? So far be it from me to suggest that the perspectives suggested in this lesson are going to be easy to adopt, no matter which one. I mean, frankly speaking, the latter ones are an entire lifetime of work and progress, and to a large degree require a gargantuan shift in the way we perceive God, in the way we perceive our relationships with him, our life's priorities, etc. And don't think for a minute that this is necessarily easy for me to say. Trust me, I have a beard and a black hat and a diet can of dry ginger ale, and it doesn't make it any easier for me. We're all equally human. We all have basic human struggles. We all, as the old saying is, I put on my pants one leg at a time like anyone else. At the same time, as mentioned, hardships and suffering are part of life. That's it. We come down to this world, and it's sort of a factor of what is here. The Torah tells us that we can rise above the suffering by adopting these perspectives that we discussed. It's hard work, but it is certainly well worth it. So what are the four paradigms again? Understandably, each paradigm is harder to adopt than the previous one. It's clearly easier to accept that although my suffering now is real, it's going to lead to a greater benefit than it is to accept the suffering itself is good. I mean, that's harder to even accept, to digest. But both these paradigms are easier to accept than not only is the suffering good, but it's actually a greater good. That's the third one, the higher paradigm. But relatively speaking, these first three paradigms are like a cakewalk relative to the leap required in paradigm D, the fourth one, which requires a complete change of life's focus. All four of them are Torah paradigms, and there's clearly a progression. You know, you can feel free to start with whichever perspective you find to be most practical in your situation. Not everybody can, go to paradigm B. Some are at A, some are halfway through A, some are not ready for A. They're just at the very beginning yet. Bearing that in mind, I'm going to get to the next text, which is 12 on page 163. As I mentioned, tonight is the yard site of the, for those who weren't here in the beginning of the class, tonight's the yard site of the 100th yard site of the 5th Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rebbe Rashab, buried in Rostov. And this is a quote from one of his writings. When our sages speak in praise of, quote, those who rejoice in their suffering, who hear themselves vilified and do not respond, they do not mean that one does not feel the afflictions or the shame, and that these experiences do not bother the person at all. Were that so, these experiences would not be forms of suffering or shame at all. We would not be able to say those who rejoice in their suffering. Besides, the mind cannot bear being disgraced, God forbid. And only a fool or someone with a deficiency of mind would not feel shame and suffering. God forbid for such a person is similar to an animal in this regard. Rather, as human beings, we experience suffering and shame. We do not consider them pleasant experiences. Nonetheless, we rejoice. And this is only due to the godly faith and knowledge that there is tremendous goodness hidden within these experiences. We rejoice, but at the same time, experience these realities as suffering. So what does that mean? We're going to do a quick analysis here. Paradigms A through C, the first three, there's no question that we experience discomfort and pain. It's there. However, these paradigms empower us to have a changed attitude towards difficulties. They help us to alleviate the distress and all the negative emotions, the anxiety, the fear that are associated with the suffering. Reb Zusha didn't feel that he suffered at all. Now, it's apparent that he, like King David, fully adopted paradigm D. The only thing that mattered to them was the intimacy with God, the love to God. Nothing else mattered. So long as he was having a good relationship with his creator, he honestly felt like he never suffered a day in his life. Now, for the rest of us who are not Reb Zusha or King David, okay, we're never going to reach the level of Reb Zusha or King David, frankly speaking. And honestly, paradigm D is not black and white. It's not like an all or nothing. It's a spectrum. The more we align ourselves with the divine soul, the more we're focused on our mission and relationship with Hashem, with God, the less we are emotionally disturbed by the difficulties of life. And the less we're going to prioritize our personal gratification, what I want, the less the lack of that will disturb us. So it doesn't change necessarily what's going on in the world of the pain, the suffering, etc. What it does help to change is our approach to it. Well, how do we view this? Is it about, I'm suffering, I'm in pain, I don't have what I need, I don't have what I want or what I think I want, etc. And then I become anxious, I become fearful, I become distressed, etc. Or, you know what? There's a bigger picture to my existence in the world. It's not just about me and my creature comforts or my issues. That's fine with myself. How about others suffering? Imagine a child who undergoes a painful operation and is seriously in pain. What's the appropriate reaction of the parents to the child? What should the parents tell the kid? Or the staff, the doctors? Should they say, hey, relax, take it easy. Don't you realize this is only for the best of you? You needed this. Is that the way to approach the kid? When we see others in pain, that's all we should focus on, the real pain that they're experiencing. Any good that God has in mind for the suffering and pain of others is not our business. Our job is to be there for them, to seek to alleviate their pain, to console them, to literally to comfort them. We don't wish for suffering. We accept painful experiences as a higher form of God's love only after the fact. Ipso facto, we don't ask for the pain, so we should have a greater and a more loving relationship with God. We don't seek difficulties and hardships. On the contrary, we constantly beseech God to give us revealed good. So one reason for this is that every one of us has a mission to accomplish in this world. And that's, as a Jew, done through Torah, mitzvot, and good deeds. And all these are easier to do when we experience revealed kindness and goodness. Maybe suffering is a greater, unfathomable good. Maybe it constitutes closeness to God. And in hindsight, perhaps my focus or perspective should have been a little bit different. But what do we do instead? We turn to God and say, God, I want lots of money so I can give charity. If you don't give me money, I can't help anyone else out. Or you say, I want health so I can serve you with vigor, with energy, with strength. I want children so I can raise them as upstanding Jews who will serve you and contribute to society. That's ultimately what we say. We don't ask God for the suffering and the pain. There was a famous tzaddik, his name was Nachum Chernobyl, or Nachum of Chernobyl. So his son, the Motel of Chernobyl, lived in the late early 1800s. He was renowned for his erudition, holiness. He's a remarkable person. And he had thousands of followers, many of whom he inherited upon the passing of his father, who was the Rebbe at the time. Once, this Reb Motel became critically ill, and he fell into a coma. And the Hasidim prayed, and eventually the Rebbe, Reb Motel, regained consciousness. So, as the tradition states, after somebody experiences this terrible thing, they should make what's called a Sudas Heidah, basically like a Thanksgiving meal to thank Hashem. So, at this Thanksgiving meal held several weeks after the Rebbe, recuperated, he told his Hasidim what happened when he was in the coma. He said, I felt my soul rising to the heavens, but I didn't want to die. So I tried resisting, but to no avail. And I was brought before the heavenly court, who were going to decide my fate, my day in court. So in desperation, I screamed that I want to see my father, Reb Nachum. So my father appeared, and we came face to face. My father didn't recognize me. He didn't recognize me as his son. So I tried to make him remember, telling him this, that, to bring about some form of recognition. But still in all, he says, I don't recognize you. So finally, my father said to me, perhaps, was there some sort of a sin that you've done recently, and maybe that's why I don't recognize you. So I thought, and finally, no sin came to mind. But all of a sudden it occurred to me, you know what? It wasn't really a sin, but I had an event that happened in my life. So he said, what is it? He says, just before my illness, there was a wealthy Jew that had come to, Nebuch became a pauper. He lost all of his money. And he came to ask me for a loan. And the reality is I didn't have enough money for what he needed. I gave him some, whatever I could, and I tried to comfort him. And I relayed to him the proverb from the wisest man, from King Solomon, where it says in Hebrew, Ki es asher ye'av Hashem yechiach, which translates in English, it's from the book of Proverbs. Translates in English, for the one who God loves, he chastises. So my father said to me, what did you mean by that? So I answered, I meant that he shouldn't worry, because sometimes God makes those who he loves suffer. So my father then said, aha, now I know I didn't recognize you. I never would have said such a thing. And indeed, here in heaven, we learn that phrase differently. Same phrase, yes, asher yoav Hashem yichiach. If someone you love is suffering, right? So what we do is we put the comma elsewhere. We put the comma that if someone you love is suffering, you shall chastise God. Not the other way around, that he chastises. So my son, his father concluded, when it comes to the suffering of others, we have to protest. We must try to reprove God and not justify God's actions. And then I came back to life. That was the story of Ramatul Chernobyl. So Esther, before we conclude here with the key points, it is a bitter pill to swallow, in particular, all the suffering that's going on in the world. I certainly don't have the answer for it. I'm in the same quandary as anyone else. But I'm just going to share with you, I guess, what's going through my head. And this is just my personal perspective. Nothing in this world happens by accident. And I firmly believe that God knows what he's doing, albeit I don't understand it. I certainly don't necessarily like it, but I believe he knows what he's doing. And God, when he made us his chosen people thousands of years ago, promised us that he's going to bring about Mashiach, and he's going to bring us to Eretz Yisrael and rebuild the third and final temple. All that, those are promises from God. You know, if I got a promise from anybody, I would say God's promise is probably better and more ironclad than any human being. So what happens? God has been waiting for thousands of years to bring Mashiach to his children. And we've had good times and we've had bad times, and sometimes we behave better, we behave worse, whatever. And I don't know exactly what it is that God's waiting for. But apparently whatever we've done, we collectively over thousands of years have done, was not enough yet to bring the world to Mashiach. In my humble, feeble mind, the way I see this is that when you have, for example, two nations go to war, ultimately one nation's going to win, the stronger nation. But it's usually at the end of the battle that everybody's giving it the last, whatever they have left in them. You're pushing, you're exhausted, they're tishmettered, totally feel destroyed, but you push to the final end. And ultimately, the one who pushes hardest is going to win. So what's going on in the world on a global level is incomprehensible, unprecedented, certainly in our times. A, with the virus itself. B, just in general, the climate in America, the climate in Israel and Iran. You start looking around at other places, like it doesn't make sense. Yes, it's all enclosed in what seems to be perhaps the works of nature or natural order of things, ebbs and flows, whatever the story may be. But truth be told, none of this is just accidental or coincidental, etc. We don't believe that at all. We all believe in divine providence. And the way I see it anyway, since you didn't ask me, I'll tell you anyway, is that God basically is sort of forcing our hand. He's forcing Mashiach upon us. Not the way we wanted it, and perhaps not the way he really wanted to bring it. But I guess whatever we were doing until now wasn't enough to make it happen. Whether it was not getting along with each other, baseless hatred, whatever it is, I don't know. But apparently whatever it wasn't enough. And now he's forced us into this position. And if you look at it on a more macrocosmic level, it's like bringing the world, A, to its knees, but to a place almost where it's like stopping. Things are stopping, economies are stopping, movements are stopping. And if you look into the scriptures and the sages, you'll see that Mashiach is equated with the whole concept of Shabbos. The first 6 millennia, the first 6 days of creation. And the last millennia, which is that of Shabbos, is known as Zman Mashiach, time of Mashiach. What does Shabbos mean? Shabbos means to rest, to cease, to stop. And frankly speaking, the world is stopping from its normal existence as we knew it not a few weeks ago, certainly in this country. And things are mind-boggling to us, and they're up and down. And yeah, there's so many moving pieces, it's hard to keep track. Sometimes it's almost better not to look at the news because it's not usually filled with good things, good tidings lately. But I firmly believe somehow at the end of all of this turmoil, the pain and suffering, and God forbid not at all to minimize the pain and suffering that people are undergoing, because it's truly painful, and it's truly suffering, and it's truly tragic, all of the above. But still in all, at the end of this story, the end of this chapter, it's going to have a good ending, the best ending. Because usually right before, so to speak, the dawn, right before the light, is that the most difficult time. It's where the Satan, if you will, the evil upstairs, the evil inclination is working so hard to inhibit the becoming Mashiach, to inhibit us to be able to worship Hashem as we should. It's inconceivable that around the world, probably 99.9% of shuls are closed. They don't have a minyan. You think God doesn't want Jews to daven with a minyan? You think God doesn't want Jews to be able to hear a Torah reading?
Yes.
You think God doesn't want Jews to be able to say Kaddish if they have to, or to have a decent representation, God forbid, at a loved one's funeral, or on the conversely celebrating in someone's wedding or bar mitzvah? Of course Hashem wants that. And it's not happening now. The whole world as we knew it to be has completely changed its face, all in a matter of weeks. Does that make sense? Usually we talk about evolution. It takes years, thousands of years, or whatever the story may be. Here it's such a short time period. So it can't just be, oh, it's another virus. We've had H1N1, we've had Ebola, we've had AIDS, we've had whatever the story may be. And they came and went. None of them affected the world on the level that this, unfortunately, this coronavirus is affecting us today. Not a one, not on this level. So again, back to my humble opinion, I don't believe it's by accident. It is certainly painful and we're suffering. Absolutely. And our job is to chastise God. Yes, we see others suffering, we have to chastise God for their suffering. But on a personal note, and I'm not telling you what to do or think, that's up to you. But to be able to recognize, you know what? Amongst all of this turmoil, there are some silver linings right now. It's an opportunity for me to be able to spend more time with my family, a more opportunity to be able to sit down and study if I wanted. A lot of those things I never had time to do. If I want to daven like a mensch and not rip through it like at a race course, I actually can sit down and daven and have in mind, you know, what I'm reading. It actually has meaning to me. It's not a lip service. These are all positive things, and I'm sure there's many more amongst all of the carnage that's going on. So I think it's key to try to keep an even keel in our heads. On one hand, demanding God stops this virus and stops the pain and suffering of his children. But at the same time, to recognize that there is a light at the end of this tunnel. And we're very close to the end of the tunnel. And don't lose your mind. And don't be overly anxious. And don't be overly fearful, which is a natural reaction because if I can't control it, I'm nervous. If I know the end of the story, even if it's painful, I can deal with it. I don't know the end of the story. In fact, if I don't see it, I can't see it. It's a factor of belief, Amunah. But God gives every single Jew an innate belief that's part of our spiritual DNA that's there. Sometimes we have to dig deep to get there, but it's there. And if that's what our focus can be, instead of focusing on all the terrible things happening, which is what most of the world is doing, focus on the good things that are going to happen, the good things that are here now, and the good things that will happen. And as the famous Yiddish idiom goes, tracht gut, wird sein gut. Think good and it will be good. This is not hocus pocus. The actual positive thinking transforms and changes the outcome.
That's true.
It's not a one man or one woman job. It's a collective job. But by keeping a positive perspective, within ourselves, and trying to make sure that becomes contagious, and that's something that can't be stopped, that will truly transform the evils of this virus as we see it into the revealed goodness, which is coming very quickly. for the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, our righteous Redeemer, specifically now in the month of Nisan, which is the month of redemption, the month of Pesach, 2 weeks away. And I'll conclude with the following thought, that the sages teach us that the month Nisan is spelled with 2 nuns, Nun, Yud, Samach, Nun. The 2 nuns stand for Nisei Nisim, miracle of miracles. And as the sages tell us that in the month of Nisan, the Jews were redeemed from Egypt, and in the month of Nisan, they will be redeemed from their last exile. May we be zoch and merit to not have to be able to study via Zoom. We thank Zoom for whatever they've done, but we can actually do this in person. Together, we'll be able to celebrate and daven together and have the Pesach Seders together, all the different things that they're telling us we can't do. Hashem can change in an instant. It doesn't have to take another 2 weeks or another month or another 3 months or whatever it is, so things run its course. That's all good according to nature. We're not limited to nature. We never have been. Our existence is proof to the fact that as Jews, we're not limited by nature, because naturally, God forbid, we would have been gone thousands of years ago. So we should all give each other a bracha, that we should all be gesund, be healthy, and our families should be healthy, and those who need a refuah, a recovery, should have a speedy recovery. There are many names, unfortunately, out there for whom Tehillim is being said, one of whom I know, well, actually, unfortunately, I know quite a few people who are in bad shape, one of whom in particular is David ben Yocheved. Amongst all the rest of the Chayla Yisrael, those who are ill, they should have a refuah shleima kreva, a speedy and complete recovery. And we should be zoch and merit to the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu speedily in our days. Amen.
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 That kind of concludes the lesson. Esther, if you still have a question, now's the time to ask.
No, thank you for that extra clarification. I appreciate it.
Rabbi, do you want to
Thank
play
you.
the key points video?
Oh, I would love to. Sure. I was
Well,
getting,
let's see. Let's
I'll,
see.
Rabbi,
I'll do that. Give
it's
me a
I
minute.
was
midnight.
getting ready for it. I was just
One
going to
second.
figure out which fingers to put where.
It's almost midnight here, so I'm going to bid everybody a good night.
Yes,
Pesach
have a happy
Sameach.
Kosher Pesach.
Take care. And thank you for an absolutely wonderful lesson.
I'm glad you enjoyed.
I always do with you. Take care.
Sei gesund.
Like I said.
L'chaim and l'chaim.
Hearing through. 1. Hardship and pain easily trigger.
Is the audio coming through from the video? Give me a thumbs up if yes.
Yes.
Perfect.
Boost of negative emotions that can cripple us emotionally, spiritually, and practically. To maintain our cheerfulness and avoid negative emotions, we must shift our perspective on suffering. 2. God loves us each infinitely, eternally, and unconditionally. God is also omnipotent, in complete control. Therefore, he does not allow anything bad to happen to us. Whatever he allows us to experience falls into 2 categories of goodness: undisguised good and disguised good. 3. There are various ways of understanding the goodness hidden in hardship. A. As a means to an end. All pain and inconvenience lead to great good. B. Direct goodness. All hardship is, itself, goodness in disguise. C. Ultimate goodness. Hidden good is greater because it is goodness on God's terms. Goodness that is so great that we cannot possibly appreciate it. D. Bonding. Covert goodness involves a greater degree of intimacy with God. In this paradigm, we no longer look for gifts, but for love. 4. Living in alignment with our divine soul allows us to value closeness to God over personal gratification.
Thank you, Zushi. One last thing, ladies and gents. I sent out an email earlier this evening about Pesach. As it stands now, we're not going to be able to make a public Seder here due to the various trials and tribulations we're under. Unless that changes, for anybody that either on the screen here or people that you know that need the accoutrements for the Seder. We're going to have a limited amount of Seders in a box. Basically it'll come with all the different items necessary for the Seder plate, with 3 hand-baked matzah, shmura matzah, haggadah, etc. They are available. You can click on there's various different links that you can click on the email that was sent. If you know someone else who needs it, please let me know, etc. We're asking for literally just the bare bones cost of what I think is like $25. Obviously, if somebody cannot afford it, we know someone can't afford it, we're going to give it to them anyway. Additionally, if anybody here needs a pound of hand-baked shmura matzah, I have them here at the shul. So you can either email me, you know how to get a hold of me. Call me, email, text, whatever. Or nowadays you can Facebook. Don't Facebook me because I'm not on Facebook. But you could anyway if you'd like to. Yeah, send me a tweet, Pinterest, or what else is out there? I don't know, whatever social media chazra they got going on. And lastly,
how about the phone call?
Phone call works. I'm still old-fashioned. That's actually the best way to get a hold of me is a phone call. I do respond to text and WhatsApp under duress, but I'll get back to you one way or the other. And lastly, if you need any pots, pans, or silverware that can be koshered for Pesach, and you need it done, we're going to do a koshering here on the Sunday before Pesach. I think it's April 5th. You can look on your calendar. I have a calendar in front of me. From 11 to 1 at Chabad House in the parking lot. Due to the various social distancing restrictions, it'll be by appointment only. So there'll be just one family or one person here at a time doing it. But I'm happy to do it for you, so you can call in if you need that done for a slot, whatever the story may be, etc. Is there anything else we here at Chabad can do for you, your families, or anyone else that you know? Regarding Pesach, please let us know. And secondly, just in general, there are elderly people in our community who are not able to get outside. They've been homebound for the last, week and a half or 2 weeks, and are still under, forced quarantine or quarantining themselves. So some of them need shopping done, some of them food pickups, whatever the story may be. If you know someone, and we're trying to help out as many of them as we can over here, obviously if you can help them out directly, that's great. If you know someone else from our community here that needs that assistance, then feel free to please let us know, myself, my wife, Rabbi Zushi, there's a couple other rabbis and rabbins in town. So be happy to help you out. Until such point, I want to wish you all a great Shabbos and enjoy the cholent. If you want the secret sauce for the cholent, you'll have to tune in to next week's class. Till that point, have a good Shabbos and a kosher prayer.